When we started this company 8 months back, the government, at least in Singapore, wasn't even thinking about food. There was no announcement about food. Like we were investing a lot, like the government was investing a lot into urban farming, vertical farming, aquaculture, and all of that, but they weren't looking at deep technology in food. So we started this company, and in 3 months, things just changed. It's kind of like being at the right time at the right place and the stars get aligned. The government just started saying, oh, we want to invest a lot more into deep tech, into food tech. When they realized there's a clean meat company in Singapore and we are the first and it's run by a couple of scientists, I think their confidence level started going up. And I think it was 2 months back, or less than 2 months back, that they announced that they're investing a little less than $150 million into clean meat.
Welcome to the Business for Good podcast,
a show where we, Paul Shapiro and Tony Okamoto,
spotlight companies making money by helping solve some of the world's most pressing problems.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to the latest episode of Business for Good podcast. When you listen to this interview, you're going to realize why I'm so sad that I didn't get to join in, since our guest is so impressive. As I mentioned on the last episode, my book tour is preventing me from doing some interviews with Paul right now. But as you'll hear, it's an episode about a topic that Paul certainly knows a lot about and was very well equipped to do this on his own.
It was a shame to miss you for this one, Tony, but you're right that this topic, making real meat without having to raise and slaughter animals, is something that I've thought a lot about. In fact, I wrote a book about it that came out last year called Clean Meat. And when I wrote the book, there were barely any companies on the planet that existed to produce such cultured meat. Those that existed were only 1 to 2 years old, and well, today there are about 30 of such companies, mostly concentrated in the US and Israel, though there are some in Europe too, but until recently, the part of the world where meat consumption is rising fastest, in Asia, there wasn't that much of clean meat action going on. Well, that's all changing with new entrants, including our guest today, Sandhya Sriram, co-founder and CEO of Shiok Meats, based in Singapore.
Paul and I got to meet Sandhya recently at a party in Oakland, and we were really impressed by both her background and her story. Sandhya was so motivated to help address the problem of rising demand meat poses that she quit her comfortable job to found her own clean meat company in Asia, and has already gone through the prestigious startup accelerator Y Combinator, raised an initial round of funding, and has even grown real shrimp meat from stem cells and served them to eager diners.
You'll hear in the interview just why the shrimp industry is in such need of improvement and just how Sandhya is aiming to foment a cellular aquaculture revolution. She's truly a great example of that brave entrepreneur who saw a problem, conceived of an innovative solution, and is now working diligently to manifest that solution into reality.
So without further ado, get ready to be inspired as you hear the story of Shiok Meats.
Sandhya, welcome to the show. Great to have you on.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
I was going to say good afternoon, but I'm in California and you are in Singapore, so I'll say good morning.
Yes, good afternoon to you.
Thank you. It was really great to get to hang out with you when you were in Northern California recently. And Tony is so disappointed that she could not be in on this interview because she really enjoyed meeting you at Ryan Bethencourt's house as well when we were over there. So she sends her regards, but it was awesome to meet you.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I was so glad to meet you and Tony. I mean, I have read your book and I was like, I have to meet this person in person. And when I got to meet you, I was like, yay! Like a slow clap inside. So, yeah, I'm super excited and thank you for inviting me for this interview.
Oh, of course. Well, it's our honor. And that's so kind of you to read the book. How nice of you. So let's talk about you first. You have a very impressive background. And that's not to say that other people who have founded similar companies don't have impressive backgrounds, but you have a deep background both in as a scientist and as an entrepreneur yourself. So before we get to talking about your current company, why don't you just tell us, what was your path? Like, you started out wanting to go into science. Why?
Right. So I think I was 3 or 4 years old, like way back. And I always wanted to be a doctor. Like, I don't know, at that point it was a medical doctor because that's the only thing I knew as a kid. I kind of grew up on that thought and my parents always supported my vision of being a doctor.
Great.
So I studied towards it. I was great at school. I loved biology. I loved science. So that's how it kind of all went. And when I kind of finish school. I was trying to get into medical school. I couldn't get it even if I had like high grades due to the Indian kind of education system. So I decided, okay, let me just get into a PhD. I can still become a doctor. I can still stay in science. So I ended up doing a bachelor's in microbiology and a master's in biotech in India. And then soon after, I knew I wanted to do a PhD for sure. So I actually moved to Singapore and did my PhD at Nanyang Technological University here. And my path was always to become a professor or a principal investigator of sorts, in terms of like running my own lab with my own students and my own staff, doing like groundbreaking research and all of that. So I think 2 or 3 years after my PhD, when I was working as a postdoc, I realized that the path to becoming a professor is pretty hard and it's pretty narrow. There are so many PhDs around the world, and there's only so many professor positions available.
Mm-hmm.
So I think early on, I kind of knew that if I had to succeed in what I wanted to do, which was kind of save human health and move towards, helping the environment, which was one of the main reasons that I did science in my education and my career. I said, I have to do something about it. It's not going to work if I just keep doing research. So I think it came to a point where I said, okay, let me quit research for a while and actually start learning the business side of science. Because if I want to do something on my own in the future, I need to know how to run a science business. So I quit being a research fellow and I took a business development with a research institute in the government of Singapore. And I did that for a couple of years before I even quit that to start Shiok Meats. In the midst of all of this, when I was doing my first postdoc, a couple of my PhD batchmates and I were pretty frustrated by just doing research. We just wanted an outlet. And we realized that a lot of the science articles that are out there are very sciencey. Like, it's not for laymen to understand and read. And this whole vision of science being like over the head and, oh, I just cannot understand, I don't want to read a science article. We kind of heard that from a lot of people who weren't in the sciences. And we said, why not we basically write these science articles in simple English? And that's how we started our first blog, which was called Biotech in Asia, way back in 2014. We started it off as like a hobby, like a blog, and then we actually started getting scientific companies come to us and say, hey, can we put ads on your website because you have so much of viewership and readership? And we were like, okay. So we're actually going to start making money on this. Sorry. And then we realized, oh, then if we have to start making money, we'll have to probably incorporate a company. So that's how the whole first step into entrepreneurship started in 2014.
Wow.
And I ran that company for about 2 years. Part-time. I was still doing my other full-time job. I was running it part-time with my other co-founders. And then that's kind of how I got the taste of entrepreneurship. And that's how I met Ryan as well. So yeah, it's been an exciting journey, I would say, for the last 5 years.
For sure. And for listeners who aren't familiar with Ryan, he's a very good guy who is an investor and biotech entrepreneur himself as well. And so what then led you down this path? My understanding is that you are a vegetarian, right?
That's right. So I'm a vegetarian. I'm actually a vegetarian by birth, by religion. As you know, a lot of Indians are vegetarians.
Sure.
But I think when I was a teenager, I was intrigued by meat. So I just wanted to at least get a taste of it and see what it was. And I did. And I think the first time I tasted like a piece of chicken, I could hear a chicken cry in my tummy. Like, it's an honest feeling. I'm not joking about it. It was pretty much like, why do I have to eat a dead animal?
Yeah.
And so great about it. Like, I didn't enjoy the taste or the texture or whatever it was. I tried other types of meats over the years and I really didn't enjoy any of it. I would rather eat my veggies and whatever is out there, which is not coming from a dead animal, right? So that was kind of my thought process.
Yeah, there's a scene there's a scene in Gandhi's autobiography where he's living in Britain and he temporarily abandons his vegetarianism, and he similarly has these like feelings of real self-condemnation over it, and it was a very formative experience for him. And you telling that story right now just reminds me of that.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy. Like the first time I ate lamb or something, I could really hear a lamb like crying inside my tummy. I was so guilty of it. I kept telling my friends I've done like a sin today or something like that. But yeah, I mean, over the years, my thought process kind of went towards, okay, if I don't enjoy it, I'm not going to have it. But it's very hard to get meat eaters to convert to become vegans and vegetarians, especially meat eaters who have been eating for a long time. For example, my husband eats meat. We don't cook it at home, but he eats it outside. And every time I go like, oh, why are you eating a dead animal? And he's like, well, I enjoy it. So, that's the kind of, so I said, okay, I'm not going to change everybody's thought process, but how do you kind of get meat eaters to eat meat without killing of an animal? And how do you get them to eat healthy meat, clean meat, without affecting the environment or the animals or even their own health? And 4 years back, when I heard, read the first story of Mark Post and Memphis Meats coming out, I was like, wow, that's the technology that we require. It was just mind blowing for me. And I was at the lab at that time when I first read this, and I was like growing, I think, like mouse stem cells or something for my research. And I was like, what if I eat this? Like, what will happen if I eat mouse stem cells? Just a random thought, right? And I'll be like, it's stem cells. It comes from an animal. We grow it so clean in the lab. I mean, you can't get it cleaner than this. So how do you do this? And it started getting me thinking. And I think over 4 years, I started like obsessively reading about it. So to a point where I started reaching out to other clean meat companies. I started talking to them. I actually interviewed a couple of them for Biotech in Asia, the news website. And then I started keeping in touch with them. And then early last year, I was like, that's it. I'm quitting my job. I have to do something. I mean, I have the skill. I have the passion. Money will come in somehow. Let's just do it. And that's kind of how the whole thought process of Shiok Meat started for me.
Wow. There's so many of the scientists who are involved in this space who have said that it was working with animal cells or some kind, or even human cells. I mean, Uma Valeti was a cardiologist, and he saw how they would inject stem cells into the patient's heart and watch the muscle tissue regenerate, and how he had these ideas like, why couldn't we grow meat this way? It's amazing that so many of the pioneering scientists like yourself in this field have had that type of an aha moment, like this eureka moment of seeing it right before your eyes and wondering what other applications there might be.
Oh, of course. I mean, the first time I started my PhD, which was like 10 years back, I still remember I had isolated muscle cells from a mouse, and I actually saw them twitching under the microscope. And I was like, my God, these are cells outside of an animal's body, and they were actually moving. Yeah. And I was like, that's crazy. Like, that's the kind of start of organogenesis and actually making organs outside of the human body and actually helping with transplantation. And then it kind of led into meat. So it's just mind-blowing.
Yeah, it is. So let me just bring us up to nearly the present then. So now, after everything you've talked about, it's now mid-2018, and you decide that you need to quit your job. You feel like you need to start this company. And the idea for Shiok Meat, and for those who don't know, tell us about the origin of the word Shiok.
Oh, sure. So Shiok actually means fantastic or delicious in Singapore and Malay slang.
Cool.
It's used a lot for like fashion and food, especially. It's a slang. So we just say if some dish was super tasty, we're like, so Shiok. It's that kind of expression.
And pretty soon people will be saying that company is super Shiok too when they're talking about your company. All right.
So, yeah.
All right. So you decide you're going to found this company, and I think you applied to Y Combinator, right? Am I right? That was one of your first steps.
Actually, it's a little different of a story. So,
okay. Tell me the correct version.
Sure. So mid 2018, July, I had applied to Entrepreneur First, which is kind of like the incubator for entrepreneurs, because I knew I had to quit my job. I didn't have the idea of Shiok Meats in my mind at that time. I was actually very sure I wanted to do something with stem cells because that's my cup of tea. So I went into Entrepreneur First, and I realized it wasn't for me. They weren't a deep tech accelerator or an incubator. So I actually quit it in like about 1 or 2 months. But in the meantime, what happened, I was talking to Ryan Bethencourt over the phone, and I was like, hey, you want to do something in Asia. I want to do something in Asia. Let's just come up with something to do. And at that point, we had no money, like nothing in mind. It was just a random conversation. And I think we went back and forth a little bit on what we can do with stem cells. And the idea of Shiok Meats was just born, I think, within a half an hour of a phone conversation with Ryan.
Wow.
It was just between the two of us. We were like, let's go shrimp in the lab. And that's it. It stopped there. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go start reading. Bye. And I said that and I put down my phone. In a week's time, I went back to him and said, hey, by the way, I've quit my job. I'm planning to do this. Let's do it. And he said, I'll put down the first check for you. Let's do it. And that's the whole start of Shiok Meats.
Incredible.
This was when I hadn't even gone into a lab to even figure out if I can take out stem cells from shrimp. Right? And there was no academic research, no papers out there that said that you can get stem cells out of shrimp.
Yeah.
But I was so confident that I was like, I can get stem cells out of any animal because that's what I've been doing in the last 12 years of my life.
Yeah. So let's talk about the why. There are plenty of companies that are pursuing growing cattle cells or pig cells or chicken cells and so on. There are even some that are growing fish cells. But you chose shrimp. Like, what's the problem that you're trying to solve here? Like, how, if your company succeeds, why will the world actually be better?
Right. So I think about 3 years ago, I had gone to Thailand for a vacation. And as part of the vacation, we had visited a shrimp farm. So this was when I don't eat shrimps, but I was intrigued as to how they grow. And I went and looked at the farm and I was shocked, literally shocked, because the shrimps were actually grown in sewage water. And I asked the shrimp farmers as to why. And they said, well, shrimps are bottom feeders, so they don't really need clean water and feed. So to save up on water costs and feed costs, we just grow them in sewage water. And I said, okay, then how do you send this out for human consumption? They said, oh, you look at this huge vat. It's filled with antibiotics, penicillin and streptomycin and all of it. We put these shrimps inside this, we clean them, and then we send it to the supermarkets. I'm like, are you kidding me? And they said, no, this is how we do it. All the farms in Thailand and Vietnam do this. I was like, I couldn't believe it. And that was exactly what people are eating. And then the next question for me was, what do you do with the antibiotic solution, right? And they were like, oh, we just dump it in the rivers and oceans. And looking at that entire ecosystem, I was like, I would never eat shrimp in my life, right? So that was 3 years back. And when I decided to do a clean meat company, the first meat that came to my head was shrimp. I was like, the way the shrimps are grown is so pathetic that I want to help this industry. And then coming to the business side of things, we saw, Ryan and I were discussing about it, and we were like, no other companies doing it. Being in Asia, we consume so much of crustaceans. Most of the crustaceans that are grown in Asia and then, exported to other countries. So why not just start off with that? So it was more of human health, environmental impact, and also animal health that kind of pushed the needle towards crustaceans.
Fascinating. So it's intriguing how there are these seminal moments in our lives that you have no idea how they're going to transform. But, here you are sitting there on a vacation, and little do you know that within just a few years later that this moment would actually really transform the path of your entire life.
Oh, of course. It's been such an eye-opening experience. Even, for example, for us to source shrimps to isolate our stem cells from for Shiok Meats, we had to go hunting for clean shrimp farms. And it had to be within Singapore, and Singapore has only a handful of shrimp farms. So we were glad to find one or two that we could buy our shrimps off from. And, when we speak to those shrimp farmers, they have such a I don't know what's the word, but they have such a worldly view about how shrimp should be grown. But because it's expensive in terms of supplying clean water and feed for these shrimps, they have to run smaller farms and be happy with that. But they are super, super sad the way that the majority of shrimps are grown. And I have no words, honestly.
Yeah. So is it only shrimp, or are you doing other types of crustacean meat as well?
Right. We just started off with shrimps, but we want to go into crab and lobster in the next couple of months. So, that's our path.
So I know that you are not growing the shell of the shrimp, but I mean, I was not raised a vegetarian, but I've been one for the last 26 years. I don't really know that much about how people consume shrimp, but I do know that, at least in the popular mindset, it seems like they're consumed in shell, right? But maybe that's not true. And I'm wondering, because the other companies seem to be going after ground meats rather than whole muscle, is that what you're doing as well, like a ground shrimp paste, or are you growing the whole shrimp just without a shell?
Right. So for now, we're doing only like a ground pasty shrimp. So it can be incorporated in dishes like dumplings or a shrimp cake or noodles or rice,
I
which is
see.
kind of more common in Asia
Okay.
because that's our market. Honestly, in Asia, shrimp is eaten in every way possible.
Hmm.
It's eaten with the shell, without the shell, as a paste, as pieces. In snacks, like we have shrimp crackers available here, we have shrimp chips available here. So it's eaten in every possible way that it can be eaten.
Hmm.
So it's a huge market to capture for us. For now, we're doing minced shrimp of sorts, but we've already started working on the R&D side on actual shrimp, like the C shape with the color, with the
Hmm.
springiness that you need when you bite into it.
Hmm.
At this point, we're not growing the shell, but growing the shell is possible, but it requires a lot more R&D. And
Hmm.
honestly, when we looked at the market size, it seems like for the frozen shrimp market, which is our market because our meats will be frozen, is that people want actually de-shelled frozen shrimps.
Hmm.
So that's more of the bigger market. But for the fresh shrimps, they need it with the shell because the shell, when you freeze it down and then cook it, it doesn't taste as good as like eating a fresh shrimp out of the water,
Hmm.
which is not our market for now. So we would rather just grow the meat only.
Okay. Fascinating. So let's talk a little bit about Asia, because you are one of the very first cultured meat companies in Asia. And I'm wondering why you think that is. I mean, you alluded to the fact that Asians eat a huge portion of seafood, of the world's seafood. I mean, really the lion's share, or actually maybe the lionfish's share, haha, of the seafood is consumed in Asian nations. So when you look at the movement to grow meat without animals, I mean, largely it seems to be based in both the United States and in Israel. Of course, there are other places where there are companies, but those are the two great concentrations of them. Considering the huge potential demand there is in Asia, why do you think there aren't more companies there yet?
Right. So, first thing, Asia is very risk averse generally in terms of entrepreneurship and actually starting startups. So, a lot of us who have deep tech knowledge, like PhDs and postdocs and so on, we're all very comfortable in our daily jobs. We're very scared of actually stepping into an unknown arena of entrepreneurship. And at the same time, the ecosystem is not here. Like when I come to the Silicon Valley, to the Bay Area, it's so bustling in terms of entrepreneurship. Like everywhere I turn around, there's an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Here, yeah, but here, entrepreneurship is looked at either you're crazy or your dad has a lot of money, or the third is you've completely lost it and you don't know what to do with your life, so you're doing this. It's kind of looked at that angle. So, honestly, to tell you the truth, when I started my first startup, I wasn't ready to quit my full time job, right? So, even I was risk averse at a point. But eventually, I think it took me about 4 years to realize that if I have to make something work, I have to work on it 100%. Even though I was working on my part time startup also 100%, but investors wouldn't invest in you unless they see that the founding team is actually, with it 100%. So all of this matters. The next thing is here in general, most of the deep tech companies that have that are startups are either spin-offs from universities or research institutes. So the research and the IP is already been kind of developed within the university as part of your research. And then when you get to a point when you realize, okay, now I can commercialize it or now I can license the technology is when you start a company. So it's already about 4 to 7 years of research being done under the umbrella of the university. And then you come out as an entrepreneur, where you've de-risked yourself a lot. So when Kai and I started, so Kai is my co-founder, when we both started this company, the first reaction we received from a lot of people was, you guys are crazy and you guys are going to fail. This was their first thing. And I was like, yeah, well, challenge accepted.
I was going to say there are many entrepreneurs who have heard that, and sometimes it's true, but sometimes it isn't.
Right. Honestly, I think the craziness was more like, why did we leave our well-paid jobs? Why did we want to start an independent company? Why don't we want to do the research as part of the university or the institute that we were working on and then spin off? So we had no IP. Like I said, we hadn't even cut into a shrimp by the time we started this company. So people thought we were super crazy. So these are some of the reasons. So it's very cultural, ecosystem thing where we don't see as many deep tech startups. Even on the healthcare side, we don't see as many startups here. Most of the startups we see here, not only Singapore, I'm talking about mostly like Southeast Asia, East Asia. We see a lot of digital health, medtech startups, but we don't see like drug discovery startups, cancer, immunology, clean meat, or any of that sort, which requires a longer runway to actually get to market.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you then, because it seems like in China, at least, the Chinese government has issued a proclamation a few years ago saying they wanted to cut in half the amount of meat that people were consuming. And I don't think that included seafood, but nevertheless, there does seem to be some governmental interest in helping to have more sustainable protein sources for the Chinese citizenry. And so that leads me to wonder, because I know Singapore too is particularly business friendly, might there be governmental supports that you could get in Asia, either from the Singaporean government or maybe the Chinese government, to help with your company's launch that you might not be able to get in the United States?
Yeah. So when we started this company 8 months back, the government, at least in Singapore, wasn't even thinking about food. There was no announcement about food. Like we were investing a lot, like the government was investing a lot into urban farming, vertical farming, aquaculture, and all of that, but they weren't looking at deep technology in food. So we started this company, and in 3 months, things just changed. It's kind of like being at the right time at the right place and the stars get aligned. The government just started saying, oh, we want to invest a lot more into deep tech, into food tech. When they realized there's a clean meat company in Singapore and we are the first and it's run by a couple of scientists, I think their confidence level started going up. And I think it was 2 months back, or less than 2 months back, that they announced that they're investing a little less than $150 million into clean meat specifically.
Amazing.
And this is huge because Singapore is such a tiny country. We are 40 kilometers east to west, and that's it. So we're the size of San Francisco, and we're a country. And for that government to come up with such a beautiful vision and an idea is great. And soon after they did that, they said that they're going to make sure in the next 10 years, but that is by 2030, 30% of Singapore's food is being produced in-house. So for those who don't know, Singapore grows almost nothing. Like I said, the country is so small, we don't have enough land or resources to grow anything. So we import 90% of our food, right? From fruits, vegetables, grains, meat, whatever it is. So for a country to be dependent on every other country for its basic sustenance, they have to come up with an idea of making food in-house. So they have come up with the vision of 30 by 30, which is 30% of in-house food production by 2030.
Yeah.
So Shiok Meats is very much in line of all of that.
Great. So are you poised to receive some part of that 150 million?
We hope so. We have actually been speaking to the various parties involved in the funding. Mm-hmm. So we're already working with a couple of academic institutes that are going to receive this funding, so we can actually work on a collaboration or a service agreement with them.
Nice.
We're also speaking to the government and the various investment arms to see how we can move forward.
Yeah.
I think for us, the biggest worry, or like the thing that keeps me up at night is, fine, I figured out the technology, I can make shrimp meat, but how do I scale this up? Where do I get the infrastructure? How do I get a factory industrial setting set up to make sure that I can make kilos and kilos of shrimp meat per week? This is kind of the infrastructure that I think every clean meat company is a little worried about. Mm-hmm. And what we're speaking to the government at this point is, if they can help us with like getting land, setting up a factory, then that'll be a big help for us. and then we can actually get to market faster.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, getting to market. Where are you now? I know that you recently did an event where there was the first tasting of your products, right? You want to tell us about that?
Sure. So we made a couple of shrimp dumplings prototypes. So we got one of our investors and two of our advisors. Actually, one of them is from GFI, Elaine Sue from GFI APAC.
Great.
We got them to taste it in front of the press. It was like a showcase that we had, showcasing our dumplings, also having the first tasters, getting a taste of it. And it was such an exhilarating experience. It was great. I still remember the minute that I opened the steamer with the dumplings and all of the press that was standing there went like, it smells like shrimp. And I was like, yeah, that's enough for me, that was
that's
like
funny.
Great. Yeah. So we did that. So we're still at a very R&D prototype stage. We're nowhere close to even getting into one restaurant. So it's going to take us about 18 months to get our meats as part of a tasting menu or as part of a dish in a premium restaurant so our aim is end of next year. And to actually reach mass scale production, it's going to take us another 3 to 5 years.
Okay. So let me ask you, you say by the end of next year, so by the end of 2020, your goal is to be in one restaurant. Is that one restaurant for like a one-time serving or on the menu permanently at one restaurant?
No, we want to keep it on the menu. So it'll still be it's not going to be like if 100 people walk into that restaurant for one meal, I don't think the 100 would get it. So it's something like the first 20 would get it or something like that. So we'll have to kind of figure out at what scale we are at that point. But our idea is to keep it on the menu, at least like keep it on a special menu or something like that for people to actually come in and taste it.
Nice. So I presume that at your tasting, this wasn't the first time anyone had ever eaten your product. I presume you guys had sampled it beforehand, right?
Of course. So the founders ourselves, so Kai and I ate it. We had our chef taste it as well. And then we had 3 of our advisors taste it. Yeah.
And have you ever eaten shrimp before in your life?
No, I haven't, but I had to when I started Shiok Meats. So
yes, of course.
So I had to just close my eyes and I was like, okay, I'm just going to put a shrimp in my mouth. And then figure out how it is. Yeah.
And so when you tasted it yourself and you did it back to back with a shrimp who had been grown, how close was it?
It's exactly like shrimp. The taste, the smell, the flavor, it's there. The sweetness of the shrimp, that umami-ness, that sea flavor, that ocean smell, it's there. It's just that the texture is not there because we haven't worked on the texture yet. So it's still like a paste.
Right.
But this is from me. But if you hear it from my co-founder, who's actually a meat eater, Kai, she actually went like, oh, wow, this is shrimp.
That's good.
We've grown it in the lab for a couple of months, but when you take it out, smell it and eat it, you actually know it's a product. So,
Well, her judgment may be more reliable than someone like yours or mine. So I'm glad that she feels the same way. The irony is that the very first meat that was ever grown outside of an animal was a fish. All these companies are focused on beef and pork and chicken. But around 20 years ago, NASA was funding this research for cosmic tourist purposes. Basically, if we're going to engage in long distance space transportation, could astronauts grow meat in space? And they grew a goldfish and they cooked it up. They grew goldfish muscle outside of the goldfish and they cooked it up. And they too said it smelled like fish. They were prohibited by the FDA from actually consuming it because it was like the product of a scientific experiment. So they didn't consume it, but they did say it really smelled like fish. And so you are bringing it back to the roots of the queen meat field for sure by going back to the sea, so to speak, and growing these shrimp here. So let me ask you, the shrimp that you grew, were you serving, was it entirely comprised of shrimp cells? Were you adding like algae oil? Were there ingredients other than the shrimp cells in there?
Oh, no. So the dumpling that we made is a traditional siumai, which is actually traditionally made with a mix of pork and shrimp meat. So in our case, we did the same, but the pork that we used wasn't real pork. It was corn, the company Quorn, which
Oh,
makes
interesting.
meat out of mycoprotein.
Yes.
So they have a substitute for pork. So we used that, and then the shrimp part was our shrimp cells.
Oh,
So we
interesting.
didn't
Yeah,
want to
cool.
mix it with traditional meat, of course, because we
Yeah.
are a clean meat company. So we mixed it with a plant-based, mycoprotein-based meat. And then, so it was it was in the ratio of somewhere between 80-20. So 80 being the pork and 20 being the shrimp,
Okay.
which is kind of the traditional siumai.
Interesting.
So we wanted to keep it very traditional. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I really enjoy corn products. I think they're great, but I didn't know that they had pork replacements. I knew they have plenty of chicken, but I didn't know they did pork. So I'll have to look out for that myself.
Yeah.
So for the $1 million question, how much did those dumplings cost?
So it costed us about $5,000 to make about 10 dumplings.
All right. Maybe the most expensive dumplings ever consumed. But I know that's obviously not what you are going out to market with. So how soon before you can bring it down to something where maybe not the same cost as shrimp, but where you think it would actually be reasonable that people would order it on a menu?
Right. So by the end of next year is when, like I said, we want to be in one restaurant, is when it's still going to be a premiumly priced product, but it's definitely affordable. So we were thinking of like a price point of $25 to $30 for a couple of dumplings. So it's still going to be launched in a high-end premium restaurant, so you don't mind paying as much. And the major part of our cost is the research cost itself, and of course, the nutrient mix that we feed the cells. So the nutrient mix currently that we use is all pharma grade, research grade, which is not the ideal for food, and it's super expensive. So we are actually working on an in-house plant-based nutrient mix to feed our cells. And we aim to crack this magic potion in the next 12 months.
Nice.
So once we're able to figure that out, the cost would actually come down at least by 100 times.
Great. So you're talking about the nutrients that the cells eat, sometimes called media for them. And, one of the criticisms, as you know, of several of the whole industry is that these products oftentimes are not actually animal free, that they are oftentimes fed with fetal bovine serum because the cells really like that. But you have a different strategy, right?
Correct. So definitely fetal bovine serum is a strong nutrient that you have to feed your cells, but this is traditionally for mammalian cells. So seafood cells, at least for crustacean cells, we don't need to use FBS. So we don't use fetal bovine serum from day one. And my research expertise always has been to grow cells without FBS. So using that research experience, we have already crack the code of not growing these cells with FBS or any animal components to start off with. Like we don't use bovine serum albumin or any of the animal products. So ours is completely xeno-free, animal-free media that we use, but they're still produced by pharma companies for traditional stem cell research, which is for human therapy and so on. So they're pretty expensive. We don't need pharma-grade ingredients for food. But unfortunately, there is no company that makes non-pharma food-grade stem cell media. So that's the reason we'll have to figure out an in-house plant-based sustainable media that is cheap, as well as that can scale up, and as well as one that actually adds to flavor and doesn't, hinder with the flavor of the shrimp.
Sure. Now, first, congratulations, because I know that it will certainly be a big boost for the company not to be relying on FBS. Let me ask you, though, are you seeking to perfectly mimic shrimp, or are you seeking to, let's say, improve on it? For example, shrimp oftentimes is perceived as a high cholesterol food. Could you make it so that it would be having the same sensory functions without so much cholesterol? Sure.
So actually, when you deshell a shrimp, let me backtrack a little bit. So on a shrimp, most of the shrimp meat is about 95% muscle, which is the protein. And then there's a thin layer of fat on top, which is actually the cholesterol, which is about 5% of the shrimp's body. So generally, when you eat these shell shrimps, the fat layer goes away with the shell. So what's left behind is only the muscle, which is the protein, which is actually healthy for you. So at this point, we are only growing that part. We aren't growing the fat part. Having said that, we are actually in the midst of doing nutritional studies between regular and Shiok shrimp. and to make sure that the nutrition is similar or even better, if that's possible. Down the line, yes, we would actually be growing that fat layer as well, but we aren't going to grow it as cholesterol. So we can convert it into omega-3 fatty acids or any of the other beneficial fatty acids without affecting the taste as much. So this is a major part of the research, but we aren't concentrating on that as much now because that 5% of fat layer doesn't really affect the taste of shrimp. For example, in beef, the fat does affect the taste, but in shrimp, it's more of the muscle and not so much of the fat.
Interesting. So what's the shrimp industry's response to this? Do you think like the farmers who sold you these initial shrimp had any idea that they might be selling away their business within years to somebody who could produce something that could supplant what they're doing?
Actually, to tell you the truth, the response has been the other way around. So most of the shrimp farmers are super, super happy we are doing this.
Tell me why.
Yeah, the reason first thing is they feel that the way that the shrimp farming is being done is completely unsustainable. It's not going to last for too long. So they're actually looking at better technology to better growth of shrimps and how they can adapt those technologies. So right now we are already having inquiries from shrimp farmers to license our technology to them so that they can start growing shrimp differently.
Wow.
Because what they're saying is, hey, we have access to land, we have access to water, we know how to make shrimps and sell them. So why don't we adapt your technology, which is cleaner and healthier, and we know how to sell shrimp, so we'll do it for you. But at this point, we aren't at a point to license our technology, but we're keeping the conversation open with them. And in the future, the idea is always to empower other people to start growing shrimp so that they can start selling it.
So is your vision then that you would that you can conceive of in the same way that Canon went from gelatin film making to digital cameras, that you could perceive yourself as working with shrimp farmers to convert the land on which they are raising shrimp right now into a biotech facility that could be producing shrimp cells that they would then convert into shrimp meat that they would sell?
Exactly. So our thought process is manufacture in-house Shiok shrimp, but at the same time, enable people who know the industry to start using our technology to grow more and more shrimp.
Oh, that's really fascinating. It would be quite a story to work with a shrimp farmer to make that conversion. That in and of itself would be a global news story for sure.
Yeah.
So Sandhya, you have used the term clean meat several times. I, of course, use that term as well for obvious reasons. But there's a debate in the community of folks who want to grow real meat without animals over terminology. Some people like cultured meat, clean meat, craft meat, cell-based meat. I don't know why everybody can only think of words that start with C, but you look at all of these words and there's this big debate over this, and I'm wondering if you have thoughts that you want to share on what you think it ought to be called.
Honestly, I think the debate is more in the US and in the West.
Okay.
In Asia, people don't really care. They're like, it's meat, that's it. So if it's meat, you call it meat. So I mean, they understand that this is real meat. It's not synthetic, it's not fake, it's not an alternative, it's actually meat, because it's to the molecular and cellular level, it's similar to regular meat. It just doesn't come from a dead animal.
Yes.
So in Asia, people aren't clearly bothered about it. So it's more of a debate in the West. At this point, I'm just writing it out. I'm like, let them decide and just give me a name and I'm fine to just use it.
That's really funny.
Right now, I alternatively use clean meat and cell-based meats. So these are the two words that I kind of, use often.
That's funny. Well, I do think that there has been these waves, like what started as in vitro meat or test tube meat gave way to cultured meat, which eventually gave way to clean meat. And now there's a move towards cell-based. And I do think it matters what it's called. I think in the end, obviously it's meat. That's what it ought to be called. We don't call we don't call ice that comes from your freezer anything other than ice just because it wasn't produced by nature. It's ice. That's what it is. And eventually, I think this will just be called meat. But for the purpose of conversation at a time when nearly all meat is actually coming from animals who are raised and slaughtered, you do need some word to differentiate it just so that you can have an intelligible conversation. And I think that there's a concern among some that I'm sympathetic to that cell-based is not that appetizing, that it's not that consumer-friendly, and that it also may be a little bit misleading since all meat is cell-based as well. All plant-based meat is cell-based. All regular meat is cell-based. So, there's a little bit of a concern there. But of course, people have the concern about clean also because they think it's too derogatory or the implication that it is derogatory toward conventional meat. And so I personally, while I'm fine using clean, I think it's accurate and effective. I also think, well, cultured is pretty neutral. It's actually an accurate term to use. And so maybe that I had shied away from using it based on the evidence, but I'm using it more and more these days because I think that it probably solves that issue of both accuracy and just neutrality. But we'll see. I'm not a partisan on this particular debate, but it is something I think is important.
I agree. I think I would rather go for cultured or clean rather than cell-based. I think cell-based makes it very sciencey.
Yeah. So, how many people want to eat cells? I mean,
I know.
not that many people salivate when they hear the word cell.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so we're going to get winding down in just a minute here, but I do want to ask you, since we're also talking about plant-based here, why go this route? I don't know if you've eaten New Wave Foods plant-based shrimp, but there's or Sophie's Kitchen's plant-based shrimp. But why go the route of trying to actually grow stem cells of shrimp, which is very expensive and difficult to do when there are already products on the market that emulate shrimp without having to go through that route?
I unfortunately haven't tasted the plant-based shrimps yet, but I hope to taste it in the coming months.
Come back to California. We will rectify that injustice.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, next time I'm there for sure. Okay, so like I said, it's going to be impossible to convert all meat eaters to become vegans and vegetarians overnight or even in a decade. So the idea is to still produce clean shrimps or cell-based shrimps so that we can cater to the meat eaters and they can still eat meat, but without killing of an animal and keeping it clean for health and the animal welfare. So the reason we started a cell-based company and not a plant-based company is because of this. We were catering to the meat eater market. And honestly, to tell you the truth, being in Asia, we've always seen that Asians who move towards plant-based products want to eventually become vegetarians. But meat eaters who love their meat are never going to go towards vegetarianism or veganism.
Sure.
So they still want to eat meat. So I think we want to cater to that bigger market.
Interesting. So I'm going to press back as a devil's advocate, not as somebody who actually holds this opinion, because I am very bullish on clean meat companies, as you can imagine. But the people who would disagree with you would say the following. That may be so for plant-based meats of the past generation. But now that you see Burger King and Carl's Jr. and White Castle and major fast food restaurants where vegetarians don't generally go are now offering these new generations of plant-based meats that really are meaty and really satisfy meat eaters who can't tell the difference. Would it be easier just to do that? And so I do have my own response to that, but I'm wondering what you would say to that skeptic who would say, well, yeah, maybe 10 years ago, but plant-based meat is a different animal today.
In the US, in Europe, this would work. In Asia, honestly, we think it's not going to. I know the Impossible and the other plant-based meat companies have launched here. It's a great success. But we'll have to see how long they can sustain, in the sense that traditional meat eaters, are they going into a restaurant and ordering an Impossible burger and not a normal burger? Is the question.
Yeah.
Maybe now it's all the hype and the branding that's there that people are going for it. But are they going to do that on a daily basis is the next question. Honestly, just within the company, even my co-founder, for example, Kai, like I said, who's a meat eater, she says, I would rather eat meat or I would eat a salad or a vegetarian dish. Why should I eat a plant-based meat? You know, like, why should I trick my mind to think that it's meat or okay, it tastes like meat, fine, but why should I do that? Like it's a rhetorical question, I guess, but it all comes down to, she's like, if I want to be vegan, I would rather just be vegan.
Mm-hmm. I see.
I would just eat what a vegetarian eats.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, I think, more of a cultural context in Asia. Uh, Meat eaters still want meat. Like, I keep telling this again and again, but we did a couple of surveys. Like, we did an extensive survey when we started the company, and a couple of months back as well. I think we surveyed more than 1,000 people. And 83% of them out of the 1,000 people were meat eaters. And 80% of that, 83% said that they would rather go for meat than an alternative.
Yeah.
So I think it's a cultural thing.
Okay. Oh, fair enough. I do think that there's a lot of room for growth in the plant-based meat space. I think it's really promising. And I do think a lot of meat eaters will be content to eat it at least some of the time. But I do think there's a large group of people, both in the US and elsewhere, who want what they perceive as the so-called real thing. And for those people, clean meat is a very important option in the future. And just in the same way, for example, that fossil fuels are such a big problem that you want lots of alternatives. You want solar, you want wind, you want geothermal, and more. Factory farming of animals is also such a huge problem that you want lots of alternatives. You want plant-based meat, you want clean meat, you want less meat or no meat diets, and so on, that you don't want to just put everything on one strategy and hope that that's the one that works, because right now, we're not really sure that that's going to be the case. We may need more than one alternative in order to solve this problem.
Exactly, because studies show that we're going to be a population of more than 10 billion in the next two to 3 decades. If you're only going to rely on one source of protein, there's no way we're going to feed everyone.
Yeah.
So there has to be a couple of options for people to choose from, so that we cater to this 10 billion population.
Yeah, right. Well, on that note, let me bring us down to the last couple questions here, Sandhya, and ask you if there are any resources that you would offer. I mean, you have an inspiring story of someone who left her job to start this company in a very risky way. And I don't know how your family and your husband felt about it, but I presume that they're pretty psyched about it now that you've garnered some investment and things are going well for you guys so far as an initial stage. But there may be other people out there who are listening who are wondering about, maybe they want to take the same steps that you did. Maybe they want to start their own company. Maybe they're interested in joining a company. What resources would you recommend for anybody who's thinking about entrepreneurship, either in this space or frankly in any space, that have been helpful for you?
I think one big resource that everybody has to keep in mind is networking and talking to people. Like, I don't recommend big books or any movies to watch, but I would say go out there and start talking to people. That's a big resource that you have to bank on. Everybody can network. It's all about getting out there. It's taken me 4 years to get to a point where I was comfortable to quit my job and actually start this. And of course, a big help in all of this was my family. Like you said, my family was super psyched even before I got any money.
Very cool.
So they were super supportive.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest resource is start talking to people about what you want to do. If you don't have an idea of what you want to do, just start talking to people. You will get an idea of what you want to do. So
yeah, it's so funny. Many people who are thinking about starting companies oftentimes will tell me that they're hesitant to talk to other people because they don't want to give away their ideas. And I always tell them, I say, it is, first of all, I'm sure you're not the first person to have this idea, whatever it is. And second, how are you going to progress? Do you really think that you are so special that you're going to do this on an island, that you're going to have to get other people's ideas no matter what? And so I definitely agree with you that talking with other people about their suggestions is a good idea. And a lot of the times they want to be helpful, and maybe they'll even join you. Maybe they'll even want to join you.
That's right.
So finally, then, at the end of every episode, we always ask guests to tell us what they're grateful for as a nice way to end on a positive note. So, Sandhya, the CEO of Shiok Meats, what are you grateful for?
I'm grateful for the opportunity to do what I'm doing on a daily basis. I'm grateful that I have a supportive family, supportive friends, and great investors on board who have the ultimate mission in mind. And I think it's been a great ride for the last 8 months and looking for an awesome ride in the next 8 years at least. So yeah, I'm grateful for everything that's around me.
That's great. Well, I hope that it's long before 8 years when your shrimp are widely available. And I hope that I get to be at one of these tastings at some point when you're going to do them the next time. It would be a great honor for me to do it. So I really appreciate what you're doing. Really admire the branch that you have gone out on to start this risky enterprise in the hopes of solving a really serious global problem. So, Sandhya, thanks so much for everything. It's great to talk with you.
Thank you, Paul, and I enjoyed this conversation. And yes, we will definitely invite you to the next tasting.
Count me in.
All right, folks, thanks so much for listening to the show.
We hope you got a lot out of it and that you will show us some love. You can rate Business for Good as 5 stars on iTunes, support us on Patreon, and tell your friends interested in business or really just in making the world a better place about the show.
And we'd love to hear what you're thinking. Please feel free to contact us anytime via our website, businessforgoodpodcast.com.
And as always, we hope that you will be in the business of doing good.